What's going on there, everybody? Hope you're all having a fantastic day. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the other day I saw a tweet by Modern Warzone that actually put a smile on my face regarding Battlefield 6. And I gotta be real with you guys, it's about time someone, when it comes to, the massive AAA industry, took a stand and really pushed in this direction. Now, it's sad at the same time because people are going to be missing out on, a lot of different games. But again, as time goes on in this video, I'll describe exactly why I think this is extremely necessary. But as you can see right here from Modern Warzone, Battlefield 6 will not be releasing on last generation consoles like the Xbox One and the PS4. Now, this is a very bold move, because a lot of the time, these massive publishers want to tap into as many marketplaces as possible. And for those who don't know, this might sound weird, it might sound odd, but last generation consoles almost make up, if I remember correctly, almost half of a lot of the modern player base right now at this current date. Again, I feel like the internet really makes us think that we are in the majority when it comes to all of our opinions on here, let's be real. But I think people really underestimate the casual marketplace for games. And, everybody that talks online who has these big beastie rigs and, brand new consoles and decked out controllers and, the best of monitors and the best of headphones, the best of gear. I think people think that is very normalized, which it is. It is. Don't get me wrong. Even on last gen, a lot of that new, stuff like, monitors and stuff, that's just how gaming has evolved. That's just normal. Back in the day, it was more normal to have a massive flat screen TV with a nice surround sound system, right? And people still do that because it's immersive. But nowadays, that's not the case. Over half the people who are probably gaming rock it on a monitor right now. But when it comes to what people are playing on, what systems they're rocking, last generation is still really popping. It's one of the main reasons. Like, for example, Call of Duty. Well, I don't know if they're ever going to drop last gen consoles, and they milk it to the point where you start seeing titles like Black Ops 3, for example, which should not have been on last generation whatsoever, but they still forced it on out there, full price, allowing people to purchase this game. The performance was awful. The visuals were just atrocious. And a lot of the items in the game were just low resolution, completely different. Like if it was a car in the new generation for Black Ops 3, then that means it was a box. A box on the last generation consoles. It was a joke. It was a joke. But Activision, I don't want to say they're smart, but it is a smart move. They know that the majority of, a lot of the people who play these games right now are still on last generation consoles. So to go ahead and cut that lifeline, it's a risky move. You're either going to encourage people to finally start coughing up money for systems, or you're going to make them just completely ignore your game and they'll go play something else. Now, Battlefield, on the other hand, is a different story because Battlefield does not have the community that Call of Duty has. Now, I'm not saying the Battlefield community is small, not even in the slightest. Do you see all the hype revolving around Battlefield 6? Do you see all the love and passion people pour into these games? Even 2042, when the trailer dropped and we all, were finessed by the CGI trailers, even then, it was extremely popular. But Battlefield typically boils down to again, I don't like calling it niche. I say it in all my other videos, but, it's not niche. It's just a little bit more of a hardcore style of community of people, who go ahead and invest a lot of time into the Battlefield franchise and play it pretty consistently. And I'm not saying that it's going to hurt the game a lot, but there is a decent portion of players who are going to be left out of Battlefield 6 who would have probably given it a go, despite all the performance issues, despite a lot of the visuals being absolute garbage, despite all of the cons that come along with still playing, a game like that is really evolving and becoming something huge and, probably hard to run on a last generation console. But despite all of that, they would have still coughed up cash to play the brand new Battlefield 6 game. And I'm sure EA more than likely knows this, as a lot of other competitors do exactly that, even if it sacrifices quality and also sacrifices how the developers can work on the game. They would miss out on a pretty juicy check in regard to the new Battlefield game. But this is why I think it's such a positive and a amazing thing that's going on here. I'm sorry to all the people who are still playing on last gen. I really do apologize. I'm not trying to be rude or anything of that sort. But we have to be realistic here, ladies and gentlemen. Forcing all of these games onto last generation consoles is holding back the developers from really truly hitting their peak potential. And honestly, I would argue that that's why BO6 is still running in such a horrible spot. These devs are constantly forced into tough situations where they have to make this game for so many different platforms of so many different levels of, capabilities when it comes to performance. It's probably an absolute nightmare to push that out and have it be consistent across the board. Now, forget about COD because COD is super duper 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 basic. Let's talk about some Battlefield. Battlefield, ladies and gentlemen, is not a simplistic game. This is a high-performance style of game, especially if you've seen all of the leaked gameplay of Battlefield 6 months ago. You know the destruction is, a level up. It's looking outstanding. Absolutely insane moments. Yeah, they're scaling back from 128 from 2042 back to 64 players, but that's not going to go ahead and, make it a game that is easy to have solid performance with. That's just simply not the case. And as I stated a million times before, every Battlefield game is notorious for having tons of bugs at launch, tons of performance issues, 1,000 different problems that takes ages to go ahead and resolve and polish and make sure it ends up in a better spot. So imagine having a game like that they're trying to push to the next generation and make it look absolutely insane and make it, play outstanding. And then having to try to dumb that down to the previous generation of consoles. That is just a task that I don't think the developers should pick up whatsoever, not even in the slightest. So to hear that Battlefield 6 is not going to be on last generation, as I said, I'm sorry. This might come off as rude, but I am so stupidly excited about this. Because to me personally, Battlefield has been in such a rough spot these last handful of years. It's been hard, especially when it comes to performance and how long it takes to put a Battlefield game to, its proper spot. And here we are with Battlefield 6, which a lot of the community already considers, Battlefield's last chance. Battlefield 2042 flop, ladies and gentlemen. You could try to put it any way you possibly want. It sold great. Obviously, the trailer clickbaited everyone. But trust me, nobody stuck around. Everybody ditched the game. And it's now known as the literal worst Battlefield experience out of the whole franchise. And that's coming off of Battlefield 5, which was already considered the worst Battlefield game in the whole franchise compared to all the previous games that they put together. And, I have to say this too. I think Battlefield 5 got to a much better spot. I think by the time they got to the Pacific update, things have improved. But again, it's been a bumpy road, and the community has not been satisfied whatsoever. They can't mess around with this title. This can't be a joke, And if they are going to have to expand and try to make it perform on last-gen consoles, that's going to make the overall quality of the game suffer, and that is going to ruin the experience for a lot of individuals. So I can't think of a better time for them to say, okay, goodbye last generation. Developers, you got some really talented people here. You got a bunch of top dogs coming into the scene here at EA. Let them cook. Let them prioritize one thing and one thing only and make sure Battlefield feels as next-gen as possible, especially when you have a game like the Finals, which was put together by previous EA DICE devs, that is just absolutely making Battlefield destruction look like child's play. When you have something like that, relevant and slowly growing within the gaming scene, they gotta step it up. Battlefield, the franchise is bigger. It's way bigger than the Finals. Yet they're getting completely showed up in every way, shape, and form when it comes to destruction. I'm not saying that Battlefield 6 is going to have better destruction, because that right there is going to be a hard task. You have one game with 9, 10, 11, 12, I don't know how many players. Not that many compared to a game that's going to be holding 64 players with a bunch of vehicles and all this other stuff. You can't really compare the two when it comes down to performance. But still, they have to step their game up, especially after we saw the destruction and the crap that they pulled within 2042. No, there's no way that they could play around in that department. They need to be able to optimize to the best of their abilities. And by kicking out last gen, that will improve their odds at making sure this game launches without it being bugged to absolute death. Now, does that mean there's going to be no bugs present? Not at all, not even in the slightest. It's probably still going to be bugged at launch. But will it be an improvement compared to something like 2042 at launch? Yes, and that's all we could really ask for. And I hope that this can set a trend. Just like how when other games go ahead and say, okay, we're going to like raise the price of our overall titles, like Nintendo, for example. That encourages other publishers to follow action, follow suit. It's not a popular one, right? I think a lot of the community is pissed about that, but that's just how companies work. If this works and this gives them the numbers that they're looking for and they can actually see improvements to the overall game of how it launches, this might be a sign to other companies that it's time to start phasing out last gen. And as sad as that sounds, at some point in time, it must happen. Because if it never happens, we're never going to see truly next generation games put out into this world. But ladies and gentlemen, as always, if you enjoyed today's video, leave a like. If you hated it, leave a dislike. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell. I post here daily at 8 in the morning Eastern time. And of course, if you guys are interested in my live streams, I stream Monday through Saturday over on Twitch. And we will be gone Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But the streams will be back up and active on Thursday. And again, if there's any hot news for YouTube, I probably won't have any up-to-date information until Thursday. But of course, if you guys are interested in any of those streams, I got a link to that channel down in the description of this video. But as always, thank you for tuning in. I'll see you on the next one. Peace out.